fake news. Let's try to define it and see why it's in the headlines. I suppose you could define fake news as deliberately fabricated stories, sometimes posing as journalism, sometimes as other authentic content, with the aim of manipulating particular target audiences. But here we want to distinguish between two main types of motivation. There are political, ideological information operations on the one hand, and there's just profiteering on the other hand. For example, the US intelligence community and also cyber consultants in business like CrowdStrike and other companies have been pointing to disinformation campaigns that ostensibly interfered with the US presidential election in 2016. That's a political, ideological motivation that we can impute. But at the same time, we also witness fake news, not so much in an ideological direction, but as an opportunistic exploitation of social media in particular and internet media in general, simply because that can be very profitable if it attracts advertising revenue. An example of the latter is the Macedonian town of Veles, the registered location of at least 100 fake news sites where a number of students dropped out of school to go full-time into the production of fake news online. It was just far more profitable to make up sensationalistic headlines than to work the jobs their parents and peers could find in their region of former Yugoslavia. With some telling the BBC they could earn 30,000 euros per month from their various somewhat nefarious internet activities. How would they rack up that kind of income? They would purchase fake Facebook profiles to seed their fake news, false news, paying 10 cents for each fictitious Russian Facebook account, 50 cents for a fictitious American one, and then try to seed false news items into authentic networks. Is that kind of thing really new? Of course not. The manipulation of facts to somebody's advantage has a long and messy tradition, certainly older than the printing press, and of course it goes hand in hand with the developments of a public sphere and of news media over the centuries. But undeniably, the advent of social media and of a business model for the internet that is almost exclusively focused on advertising has increased the reach of fake news. Placing something apparently newsworthy on Facebook, for instance, can give you potentially global reach without any editorial filters or technical access issues. Unlike in older media societies where there were barriers to entry for production costs, for distribution costs, for editorial expenses and other things, now everybody on the internet is a potential creator and amplifier of factoids, so that skillful placement of false news can exploit authentic channels and networks even if they originate from fake accounts. While the effects of a disinformation campaign may become visible much faster that way in our digital age, the principle of something like a weaponized narrative goes back centuries. Colonial and revolutionary Americans, for instance, were quite effective as it. Paul Revere's 1770 engraving of the bloody massacre in King Street, for instance, very clearly calculated to agitate against the British Army's presence in New England. It was clearly not an accurate depiction of the actual event. It shows an orderly line of British soldiers firing into an American crowd, equivalent to a tendentious message in 140 characters with a Photoshop picture. So what constitutes a good fake is how well it resembles the real thing, or what people want to see in the real thing, or how well it resonates with a certain kind of predisposition. As one can also learn from the famous film F is for Fake by Orson Welles about forgers. In this situation, we can recognize a demonstrated need for citizens to more easily recognize reliable information and to more clearly distinguish it from opportunistic profiteering and advertising, as well as from ideological campaigns. The Australian Macquarie Dictionary, AMD, chose fake news as its word of the year for 2016, referring to disinformation and hoaxes published on websites for political purpose or to drive web traffic, the incorrect information being passed along by social media. Explaining their choice, the EMD argued that the term captures an interesting evolution in the creation of deceptive content as a way of herding people in a specific direction. This trend for false news is seen as an element in the deeper democratic challenge of what is known as a post-truth era. Post-truth, by the way, was the Oxford Dictionary's word of the year for 2016, but it seems to imply that fake news are just a way to dismiss unwelcome media reports. And that's certainly not all there is to it, even if Donald Trump, Sean Spicer, Kellyanne Conway, and many others who are giving us examples to discuss seem to want to use the term fake news this way, namely just to denigrate certain kinds of media reporting that they do not agree with, that they don't like, that they want to ignore, that they want to suppress. So we have to be a little bit careful about the definition. So in the next few minutes I'm going to provide a few examples, mostly real, one fictional example from a television show that reflects the debates pretty well. And we're going to see that the question is how to distinguish between the real and the fictional, even in the fictional example. So for instance, when White House spokesperson Kellyanne Conway invented a Kentucky massacre in order to defend a ban on travelers from 7 Muslim countries, very few people believed her. When Sean Spicer, a White House spokesperson, declared that Adolf Hitler did not use chemical weapons, few journalists could believe they had just heard him say that. But many other examples are more dangerous because they're less easily recognized by the majority of the audience, and they're not debunked right away, and so they can propagate and get a lot of people who may not know either way believing in something that is demonstrably false. Just a month ago, in March 2017, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Opinion and Expression, together with the OSCE representative on freedom of the media and other international monitors of freedom of expression, have issued a joint declaration on fake news, on disinformation and propaganda. They expressed alarms at instances in which public authorities denigrate, intimidate, and threaten the media, including by stating that the media is the opposition or that the media are lying, thus undermining public trust and confidence in journalism as a public watchdog, with the risk of misleading the public by blurring the lines between disinformation and media products containing independently verifiable facts. Some of the best false news productions come out of Russia. So some really amazing examples can be seen on the Kremlin-directed TV channel Russia Today, or RT, which is available in a number of languages in a number of countries. RT will tell you that in the West, microchips are implanted under the skin of office workers to make them more submissive and passive. RT will tell you that they're surprised by alternative polls that reveal that Sweden wants to leave the European Union. It's probably the only TV channel that tells you that the French president apparently regrets the sanctions imposed on Russia, and that the German foreign minister has apparently praised Russia for its constructive role in resolving the crises in Ukraine and Syria, none of which is verifiable. RT also claims Russian ground forces have not operated in Syria, and that Russia's primary mission there is to fight Daesh, ISIS, not to support Assad. The interesting thing to note is that RT employs talking heads who are not Russian, but who can appear on the screen relaying pro-Kremlin disinformation narrative in their target country's native languages. For that reason, RT prefers to use international journalists and only rarely Russian colleagues as hosts and reporters. Their role is to speak in English, in French, and other foreign languages without an accent. Not one, but 2 international news presenters working for RT have actually decided to quit their jobs during live broadcast. On March the 5th, 2014, just about 3 years ago, Liz Weil, an American news host, told her audience live on air why she could not legitimize Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea. And not too long after that, another RT anchor, Abby Martin, left RT after criticizing Russia for its occupation of Crimea as well. There's another state-controlled Russian TV channel which recently ran a program that asks, how does the Rothschild family struggle to control the world? This is Channel 1, Pervy Canal. They apparently saw no problem in asking this kind of openly anti-Semitic question, kind of a conspiracy theory that they illustrate with a series of anti-Semitic images. Look at the piglets in the image below. See the reach of the Rothschild conspiracy, according to Russian public television. According to this program, media such as Libération in France, The Economist in Britain, the Telegraph and the BBC are all supposedly controlled by a banking dynasty. They claim here that media under their control write only about the Rothschilds as hardworking people and philanthropists, but not as global conspiracy. And in addition, Channel 1 alleges that French presidential candidate Emmanuel Macron is in that family's pockets. What this shows is that when conspiracy theory takes the place of critical engagement in the public sphere, the debate over economic and ideological issues online is really impoverished. Yet, as the individual citizen grows more transparent online, thanks to ubiquitous big data collection and data brokering, network power becomes increasingly opaque, giving rise to conspiracy theories in the absence of reliable information about the data brokers, the surveillance networks, and the marketing operations. Conspiracy theories go one step beyond the alternative facts, the fake news strategy. Conspiracy theories provide alternative narratives that tend to virtualize history and politics whenever official accounts appear too selective or too tendentious to a part of the audience. As Frederick Jameson has argued, conspiracy theory must be recognized as an insistence, however degraded, on the readability of our world and its ever more complex technologies. There's no vantage point in contemporary media society from which the new media do not seem deeply suspicious. This fosters a culture of paranoia that goes hand in hand with gadgets that simultaneously isolate and connect. Paranoid stories about subversive hackers or omnipotent corporations are the flip side of a neurotic identification with a central power that would explain and manage the decentered society. The study of conspiracy theory tends to fall into two camps. One pathologizes paranoia, the other celebrates it as a populist cultural expression. The problem with this binary opposition is that these kinds of identification are usually made by the other side as a way to commence criticizing the existing literature. So, as one critic might say, Esther Dyson might say, the net is a medium not for propaganda but for conspiracy. There's so much stuff out there that no one has the time to contradict all the errors. And it's true, circulation of a rumor, even in the form of denial, can be a way of legitimating it. This has led some on the other side to scoff that conspiracy theory is a sophistication of the ignorant. But the interesting thing about conspiracy theory is surely not only that it represents a paranoid expression by normal people, but also that it's in fact a mode of theorizing about our media society. There are some people who surmise that on the web we get what we wish for, an inclusive public, and that's precisely the problem. Conspiracy thinking may help organize our fears about new media. One's comprehension of our media world seems possible only through media. Critical reflection has to go beyond the paranoid assertitude that technical media simply are power and that their power is no longer localized, addressed, contradicted, or held in check. The greatest advantage of conspiracy theory, of course, is that as one expresses suspicions, one avoids being considered naive and perhaps appears smarter than the average consumer. The anonymous amorphous power behind the screen and keyboard, folder and file, client and server, code and compiler, and so on never shows itself, or it shows itself only as the apparatus. Common sense alone is not enough to debunk conspiracy theory. Construed as the antidote to theoretical thinking, common sense is the most susceptible to carrying unreflected and unsustainable positions, precisely because it does not allow for rigorous self-examination. Theoretical modes, whatever their transgressions against the principle of parsimony, will in the end benefit from the power to harness reflexivity for the kind of insight that may, with time, become common sense, but rarely without clashing with it first. So you could say, to graduate from the Frankfurt preschool, media studies needs to aim beyond modes of theorizing that find culture and industry always already in cahoots with the obscure motives of special interests. With their kind of coverage of crude conspiracy theories, Russian state-controlled media seek not only to please audiences and advertisers, but also to intervene in other countries. A detailed analysis of the Twitter followers of two Russian media outlets in France, Sputnik FR and RT en Français, shows that their most active followers are nationalist and isolationist groups, supporters of Russia, opponents of the centrist candidate Macron, and many times automated Twitter bots. Followers of these two Twitter accounts retweet their content at twice the average rate of followers of other French media outlets, so they're more dedicated and more active than the average French Twitter account following news. A majority of the most active followers of the two Russian Twitter accounts for French speakers expresses anti-Islamic sentiments, supports Marine Le Pen. Moreover, a significant proportion of the Twitter followers of these two Russian accounts in France are evidently bots based on their account anonymity, activity, and amplifying tendency. The top 50 accounts mentioning or retweeting Sputnik FR posted almost a third of all mentions in the month of March 2017. The top 10 accounts alone account for 14% of all mentions. By contrast, the top 50 followers of the BBC Twitter account in France made up only 7% of monthly mentions. So the most hyperactive of these French amplifiers of Kremlin-directed fake news outlets post an average of over 500 tweets per day, of which 88% are retweets. When the United Kingdom last October closed the British bank account for RT after the news service was reprimanded by the media regulator Ofcom for biased and misleading reporting on Syria and Ukraine, this alerted some people to the dimensions of the problem, but RT still operates with impunity in many other countries around the globe. If we had lots and lots of time, we could discuss other examples of false news being placed in various countries. People are amused by the fact that Pizzagate had any legs on American social media. People were perhaps less surprised to see that Facebook just closed 30,000 French accounts, having identified them as fake. There's also maybe something to learn from the current season 6 of the television show Homeland, which shows the use of sock puppets of fake social media accounts for ideological purposes. It's clear that advertising funds fake news and feeds the underbelly of the internet. Companies like Taboola, Rev Content, AdBlade, Content.ad, etc. are all providing advertising support for fake news. Their links often look like they provide related content, but in reality, this clickbait mostly relies entirely on sensational headlines and promotional networks. Taboola calls itself the world's largest discovery platform. These kinds of native advertising modes erase most of the visible distinctions between sponsored content and researched news. Now, Google and Facebook may claim that they're taking steps to remove false news from their ad networks, but these sites continue to make a lot of money, and new networks like them keep popping up. They take advantage of the very divided political situation in a number of countries, not just in the United States, which is one of the biggest media markets, but likewise in France, in Germany, in the UK, and around the world. Wherever there is a political contest that divides the country, you can take advantage by feeding the misunderstandings between the two sides, or feeding the resentment that some might feel of political candidates of a different stripe. This is also, of course, the consequence of a long prepared attack on authority and expertise. The attacks on journalism, on academia, on experts of all stripes have started from all corners. They're not always populist attacks, but you could say that maybe the main consequence of fighting fake news by weaponizing big tech like Google and Facebook promise to do is only going to accelerate the refeudalization of the web and make it less open, less inclusive, less participatory. This situation leaves us with a number of questions that are still open. We don't know very well online how to distinguish advertising profit-motivated false news from political information operations. When the term fake news emerged as a catch-all phrase to refer to everything from news articles that are factually incorrect to opinion pieces or parodies or sarcasm, hoaxes, rumors, memes, online abuse, and factual misstatements by public figures that are reported in otherwise accurate news pieces, there also, I think, should be a distinction between false news that are originating somewhere, purport to be factual but contain intentional misstatements, and false amplifiers where there's coordinated activity by inauthentic accounts with the intent of manipulating political discussion, or maybe with the intent of driving advertising profit in a certain direction. This is more than just disinformation. If somebody knowingly or not knowingly amplifies biased or misleading information, that is part of the participatory environment that we have come to expect from social media, but it nonetheless contributes greatly to the success of fake news. What's necessary is not just preventing fake account creation and identifying and removing fake accounts. That could easily backfire into making people feel that they're even more under surveillance, that they're even more under scrutiny. I'm also skeptical about using analytical techniques, big data, machine learning to disrupt certain types of abuse. Everybody's seen that those technical solutions are not nearly as reliable as we would like to think. So it's good when Facebook in France on April 13th closes 30,000 fake Facebook accounts, but how can people who are active in those networks contribute and not rely on a corporate security or on surveillance to be the answer to false news? In Germany, people are discussing a proposed new law that would hold providers of internet platforms responsible for any kind of hate speech or fake news that is propagated within that social network. You could argue that we need a law like that so that the companies, the corporations that are enable online discussion, that enable social media, feel more directly responsible for the content. It might be relatively easy because there's a lot of consensus around libel, around hate speech, and that we do not want to propagate calls for violence online. But as soon as the consensus is no longer so obvious about what is or is not correct, what is or is not trumped up, false, fake, it's not so clear whether you can hold responsible the national office in Germany of Facebook or of Google or of any of the social media that are increasingly globally popular. Even people who are engaging in excitable speech online, whether on news websites and comments, in their own opinion pieces, on their own websites, and social media, that anybody who's getting angry or getting partisan online still has the right to do so, right? So if you're introducing overblocking, filtering, that could lead to more censorship of all kinds of content that might be legally permissible, but formulated in a rude way, or formulated in a slightly inappropriate way, without being illegal. A rush to passing a law that holds corporate interests responsible for anything that's posted on their platforms is probably not an easy solution that we're looking for either.